So I decided to do a late night cash session at SA Card House. I bought in for $1,000, and the game was extremely deep for a 1-2 game. There is one good pro on the table, and most of the table was more recreational players. The average stack was probably about $700 or $800. So one player in particular, he's a very aggressive maniac player. I've played with him several times, and he had a lot of chips in front of him, and he's also pretty good. That's the dynamic of this game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just go through all the hands, just give my thought process as I played each hand. This first hand, I had Jack 7 of hearts. I straddle $5 on the button, and there is a raise from a maniac player and 3 callers. The raise is to $15. I, at this point, have been raising very tight. The table hadn't seen me play a lot of hands yet, so I decided to 3-bet this hand because I have a playable hand. I hadn't played a hand in a while. I wanted to isolate against the kind of wild player with Jack 7 suited. So that's literally my thought process. But the problem is when I raise, I get 3 callers. So 3 people call. I raised at $80, 3 people called. Flop comes out, and it's Jack 9-3. So they all check to me. I get a feeling that nobody really has anything. They're calling with an extremely wide range. The recreational players that called, I know that they're calling with more like premium hands, Broadways, or pocket pairs. I actually do think that there's a good chance I have the best hand on this flop. So I just bet hoping to take it down. Yeah, I bet $200. Everyone folds, I take it down. So we win our first pot. Boom. On to the next hand. This next hand that we're going to talk about is a bomb pot. So we play a lot of PLO bomb pots at this table. At this point, I'm up about $300 or $400. We flop pocket fives full of fours on one board. We have tight, good professional player Doug leading out. The fact that he's out of position to me means that he's betting with a very strong hand. He's betting into multiple people in a bomb pot. He never would do this with a weak hand. We do flop the top boat on one board. A lot of players are going to want to repot this, but there's no need to repot this because by repotting, I'm actually forcing other people to fold bad hands, and Doug's going to call, and then we're probably going to be chopping the pot, and we're not going to win anything. So what I'm really wanting to do is call, and hopefully other people are calling with bad hands, and we're going to be chopping their money. That is what happened. Someone called. Now the turn is gold. We turned the straight up nuts on the board. We turned quads. So now we're free rolling. At this point, we're feeling, like we're guaranteed half the pot. So what we really want to do is we want to build up a pot to where hopefully we can just push Doug out of the pot and push the other players out, and we can scoop a big pot. The good news, though, is that the 4 on the bottom board, it gives us an open-ended straight draw. So we have 5-6 in our hand. So we actually potentially could scoop this hand. So Doug leads out and pots the turn for 135. And when he does that, I know that he likely has a 4 in his hand, maybe a set of queens. We're guaranteed half the pot. So, and if we get lucky on the other board, we hit a straight, then we likely can scoop this pot. So we want to build up as big of a pot as we can. I decided to pot it for $450. Doug decides to call. Doug's my friend. Pot's big enough. He goes, I'll check any river to you. And at this point, it's like, oh, he's not going to fold for his last $250. Good etiquette. I just check back. He's done the same for me. But I do river a 3 on the bottom board, so I ended up having nut on both boards. We scoop the pot. So now I'm up $1,000 or more in the session so far. So this next hand, we have 10-5 offsuit. I straddled 5. Duke is an extremely maniac player. He's raising literally with almost any 2 cards. So I normally am going to snap fold this hand against your average player. Duke is a very aggressive player, and has a very wide range. And when I'm talking wide ranges, you want to be thinking, like any 2 somewhat playable cards. So the fact that I have position on him, if I hit a pair, I'm not going to fold. I'm going to be value betting. In a heads up pot against Duke, when I have position, I'm going to be calling any 2 cards on it, any 2 somewhat cards. I'm not going to call a 7 deuce offsuit or Jack 3 offsuit, but I am going to call 10-5. And the game was very loose. Like, it's also good etiquette for me to be calling Duke. He gives me a lot of action with bad hands, and it's almost like I need to be giving a little bit of action back. So we go to the flop. He raised 19. I called. He checks it on the flop. It's ace, 7 of diamonds, and a 9. So I have the 10 of diamonds in my hand. When he checks it to me, I think that at this point, he probably doesn't have an ace. He probably doesn't have a lot of strength. I don't have any showdown at this point, so I feel like in order for me to win this pot, I got to bet on the flop. I could turn a straight draw and go runner flush or runner straight. So I could barrel the turn if I need to, if he decides to check call me. On the turn, he checks it, and I decide to give up because this is a diamond, and I could river another diamond. The river is a 4th diamond, and I see Duke check his cards, and he bets out $30 into the pot. I look down, I have the 10 high diamonds. So the ace and king of diamonds are out there. Only the queen and jack beat me at this point. He makes a $30 bet. It's an easy call. He has a straight, I have a flush, we win the pot. So that's that hand. In this hand, this is a very interesting hand. I had 8-6 of diamonds. I decide to raise it. Recreational passive player, he limps. Good player, he limps in. I raise it to $15. I get 4 callers. The flop is ace, 5-5, rainbow board. Very interesting flop because small blind player, recreational deep stack player, he lead bets $15 into this pot. It's very common for recreational players. They're going to lead bet with a moderately strong hand. They're not going to be lead betting very often with a nutted hand. A lot of times they call them feeler bets. So they're going to bet a little bit and they want to see where they're at. The fact that I raised pre-flop shows that my range consists of a lot of aces in my hand. Whenever he lead bets 15, all the other players folded. I'm in position. I decide to call. I'm calling with the intent to bluff on a later street if a scary card comes out. I don't think he has a strong hand at this point. So I also do have 6-8 of diamonds. There's a 5 of diamonds on the board. So I could turn a straight draw, a flush draw, or both. So I do got runner outs in case he does actually have a 5, and then I could get paid if I hit my straight or my flush. So we go to a turn. The turn is another ace. And I'm watching him. He lead bets another $15. So this is very common. A lot of players will see where they're at if they just get called. And if there's kind of a scary card, they'll just bet a little bit again. This pot now is about $100. He only bets $15 into a $100 pot. If he bet with an ace on the flop, a lot of times what players will do is if they hit the nuts, then they're going to check it, or they're going to get nervous. They're going to bet differently. When he bets a small $15 bet, that doesn't feel like an ace is full of 5s. That feels like a very weak pocket pair, or he could have a 5 in his range. I've got air. I decide to bluff at this pot because I have so many aces in my range. I decide to raise to $50. If he calls me here, he's probably going to check the river with his weak hand, and I could just give up. But I think that $50 is enough. It's like the cheapest amount I could bluff, but giving me some fold equity. Villain decides to fold. He folds pocket 10s face up. I show the bluff, take down the pot. So nice little win right there. This next hand, I have 7-8 of hearts. I'm in the big blind. So there's a couple limpers. Maniac raises to $15. Doug calls, the button calls. I'm going to flat here. This game is very big, very deep. People have $1,000 plus in front of them. I'm sitting about $800 up right now. I'm really wanting to call these multi-way pots with these multi-way hands. Even if I'm out of position, I'm not really looking to try to bluff or anything with this hand. If I'm more like trying to hit a hand and I could just get away from it if I miss. Flop comes out. It's King 9-3, 1 heart. Maniac player decides to c-bet. We get a flat on the button. It's easy fold. I'm not going to even try to flirt, even though I do have some backdoor draws and everything. I'm out of position. Don't really want to play this hand against these kind of players. They don't like to fold their hands. I'd rather be in position to float with this hand, which we're not, so it's not fold. So this next hand was an interesting spot. I'm in the cutoff. I have a good friend of mine. He's a good player, plays tighter ranges. He straddles $5 on the button. There are 2 limpers, the Maniac limps and a passive rec player limps in. I have King 6 offsuit. I have a bad hand, but I do have a pretty good table image at this point. I decide to raise it to $35 pre-flop, hoping to take it down or get it isolated with a weak player if I'm in position. Unfortunately, Maniac calls, passive player calls, and tight range player buddy calls on the button. At this point, it's a big bloated pot and I have a weak hand. I'm really not that excited about my hand. Flop comes out, ace, 10, ace with 2 spades. Everyone checks it to me. I am not going to bet on this flop because a passive type player is going to be limping with a suited ace or ace jack offsuit, or they're limping with a lot of aces and they're going to be trapping a lot of the time. There's no need for me to try to bluff at this pot in multi-way. So I check it. I look at my buddy JR. He's kind of like, I could tell that he is thinking about betting. He just checks it. The turn comes out. It's a 9 of diamonds. Everyone checks it to me. I check it. JR checks. Gets to the river, and the river's a blank. They check it to me, and I actually at this point am thinking that my king high likely could be the best hand. I check it. JR checks it. He has king 4 of spades, so he misses flush draw. We both chop it with king high in a pretty big pot, so that was an interesting hand. Okay, so this next hand, there's one passive limper. I am in the hijack. I raise it to $20 with 10-6 offsuit. Very loose range. At this point, the table's getting a little tight. I'm just playing like kind of wild. I just feel like I have some position. The 2 players on my left are very tight. If I raise, likely they're going to fold, and then I can play a pot in position. That's kind of what I was literally thinking. Maniac player calls. Passive player calls. Flop is 7-8-7. I do have a gutter. Maniac player checks it. Passive player bets out, and at this point, when he bets out, I decided to float once because I do have a gutter. I'm not really calling to try to hit my hand. I'm really calling because at this point, there's 7-8 of hearts out there, so 7-8-7. I don't think that this player is betting out with a 7. I think the top of their range at this point is a small pocket pair or an 8. That's the top of their range, and they could easily have a flush draw. So the fact that I'm the pre-flop raiser, I do, in their minds, I have a stronger range. So if there's a king or an ace or a queen that comes on the turn, or the river, there's a lot of times I can get them to fold. I could be bluffing on this. Another thing is, if the hearts miss and they just check it, a lot of times their draw misses, I can bet and take it down. I'm really targeting hands king high to fold. That's my thought process. Turn is a 3. I check. Passive player checks behind. River is a deuce. And I can tell, like, the hearts missed. I bet $100. I'm trying to take this pot down. I do feel like the draws missed and the small pocket pairs are in a kind of a tough spot. It's very close. It's my buddy JR. He's playing kind of like tighter at this point. He goes, I think I'm supposed to call. At that point, I could tell he just had ace high or a small pocket pair. It's real close, and so what I did was I actually took my phone and I subtly started like recording the hand to try to pretend like this is a big hand for me. I want to see what happens. And fortunately, he folded. He folded pocket 4s. And so we take down the pot with 10 high. That was a very good little bluff. I don't know if it was the right play, but it was more of an exploitative play to try to push someone off of a weaker ranged hand. This next hand, we have ace 8 offsuit. There's a limper. I raised to $25. Ace high is good against maniac players. Of course, he calls me. We're in a heads up pot. The flop is queen 9-4 dry board. He lead bets 35. Snap fold. I'm not going to float with this kind of hand. This really connects well with his range. I think that he has a lot of king 10 offsuit. He has a lot of pairs of 9s, even 4s. I'm not going to really float here unless I have some kind of draw. I would float maybe against more of a passive player, but this guy doesn't like to fold. I don't want to get involved in this hand anymore. And that's kind of why I don't usually raise with aces, offsuit, bad hands like that. But like I said, this table was a very action table, so I was more playing exploitative, kind of experimenting with different things. Okay, this next hand I have pocket 8s. Pretty standard raise. Wild player, he does straddle $10 on the button. I raised to $30. I get a couple of callers. Doug 3 bets from the small blind. Very interesting spot. So he 3 bets me to $125. Now, it is deep stack poker. When recreational player calls my $30 raise, I'm in a spot. So here's my thought process. Doug is capable of re-raising me very light here, but he's in the small blind. He sees that there's a very wild maniac capable player on the button, and he sees that I just got flatted by a recreational, pretty loose player, but the fact that this pot is bloated, it looks like people are going to be calling. When Doug 3-bets from the small blind, I'm putting him on a stronger range than he normally would do that, because he knows he's going to get called. He knows he's going to get called a lot of times, and he is willing to play this hand out of position. Doug's a very smart, competent player. I've played with him many times. I normally like to flat here, even to set mine to try to catch up or whatever. I also have to worry if I just call him. I know player on my left is going to call, and then I know Maniac player is going to play. So I'm playing a multi-way pot out of position against strong ranges from Doug. I don't want to see a jack or queen high flop and have to fold. I just feel like this is a bad spot, so I decided to fold this hand. And the flop ends up playing out. It turns out I would have flop is 7 high. I had a gutter, and they play a big pot. Doug has ace jack offsuit, and he wins it with ace high. I would have hit the gutter straight, and I would have scooped a giant pot. So it turns out I would have won the hand. However, I do like my analysis that I do think Doug was at the more on the bottom of his range in this. I think that ace 10 offsuit, ace jack is like more the bottom of his range here, in his 3 bluffing range. I also just didn't really want to play this hand out of position in against the players that are calling with looser ranges, like king queen offsuit and things. So interesting hand. Okay, on to the next one. This next hand is an interesting hand. I have king 6 offsuit in the small blind. It limps around. I'm in the small blind for $1. I know that the big blind's going to check it, so I limp in for $1. Flop is ace king 9 rainbow board. I have second pair. On the flop, it checks. I just check it because Doug does like to limp with stronger hands. Doug limped in the hijack, and I likely have the best hand on the flop. I have a king, and I don't really want to bloat a pot when I'm out of position. I don't want to set myself up to be bluffed off later, so I just check it. It checks through. The turn is a deuce of hearts. It's an interesting card. I decide to check it again for pot control, and Doug bets $11. I call. The river is a very interesting card. It puts the king of hearts out. There's 3 of us, actually. So when I call the 11, so does rec player. The river is a king of hearts, which gives us trips. It gives me trip kings. I check it. I think about it, and I check it because if I bet, Doug's good enough to fold an ace. But if I bet and Doug raises me, I'm in a very gross spot. The flush gets there, and I have a really bad kicker. Now, it's kind of a bigger pot. Rec player checks it, and pot is only $40 at this point. Doug decides to overbet the pot. He bets $60 or $55 or $60 into a $40 pot. Very interesting play, a very advanced play. He's polarizing his range. So he's either got a straight bluff or he's got a nutted hand. It is a limped pot, so he could have a flush, a weak flush, and he's trying to get value from a king or even an ace. I don't feel like rec player on my left has much. I'm not worried about him. I am just literally thinking it's very tempting for me to call because I have trip kings. But a big thing I've learned is you don't want to call based on the strength of your hand. Calling on the strength of my hand has nothing to do with the pot. What I'm really trying to do at this point, when Doug polarizes his range by overbetting the pot on the river, like my pair of deuces on the river could be good. It doesn't really matter the strength of my hand because he's either like nutted or nothing at this point. So I do make it very tight fold because even I don't feel like Doug is overbetting a pot here as a bluff very often. I've played with him several times and he does this with tighter ranges. I think that he would also value bet with a king here. And if he does that, he's likely got us beat because I only have a 6 kicker. If he had an ace on this board, he has so much showdown value that there's no need to bet the ace. He's going to just check the ace back because he doesn't want to get check raised or bluffed off of his hand when he likely does have the best hand with an ace. His value hands are stronger than ours, and his bluffs are just complete air. There's not a lot of bluffs. I feel like he's got the hand. So I folded. He did. he did actually have a flush. So I made an amazing fold, which I normally don't do that to Doug, but I did make a good fold there. I made a bad fold with my pocket eights, made a good fold here with trip kings. He's laughing. He's like, good fold. He goes, for real this time, it was actually a good fold. In the next hand, I was in middle position, and I was feeling frisky. I decided to raise with 8-4 of hearts. I raised it to $30 because there was a straddle and a limper. I raised it $30 to isolate against the passive players. I do get 3-bet from a recreational player to $85. I just folded. He caught me. He caught me raising with a bad hand. Of course, I could try to call and try to outplay him, but I am out of position. I do know that he is re-raising me with a strong range. I don't think it's a good spot for me to choose to try to like play with him. So easy fold. Okay, this next bomb pot is the most sick pot I've played in a while. So I do have 5-10 of clubs and 3-7 of diamonds. I am in middle position. The flop comes out 2-4-6 on the top board. So I flop the joint there. Like I got the stone cold nuts. Now on the other board, it's Jack 5 of diamonds with a 9 of spades. So I do have a 7 high flush draw on that board. And I also have a gutter because I do have 7-10. So if I hit an 8, I hit a straight. In PLO, you're not, just because I flop the nuts on one board, someone else could easily have the same hand and they can be beating me on the other board. So they would be quartering me. I don't really want to build a big pot with just like, even though I have the nuts on that board by the river, it's likely not to be the nuts. And PLO is a drawing game, so they're going to call me very light. So I check it, and JR, tight player, pots it, $35. Rec player snap calls with that. Now, I know JR is betting with something. So I can't fold. I've got the nuts on one board at this point. It's $35. I only call because there's a good chance that one of them has the same hand that I have, or they're just drawing to bigger hands. So I'm really more like, I'm going to call to see how the turn plays out because I know JR is betting with a strong range here. So interesting cards come out on the turn. It puts out the 9 of diamonds on the top. So now I still have the nuts, but now I have a redraw to the diamond flush over there. And it puts the 8 of spades on the bottom board, which the 8 gives me the second nuts on that board. I have the nuts on one board and the straight on the other board, and I'm drawing to diamonds on both boards. Now, I do believe that there's a good chance that my diamond draw is not very good, but I've got the nuts and the second nuts. Now I'm on both boards, so I'm feeling a lot better. The 8 of spades on the bottom board does put out the nut flush draw also on that board. So I do want to get value for my hand. I bet out $100 simply because I'm kind of happy with my hand. There's only one card to come. I have a good chance to scoop this pot. I'd like to kind of get it into a heads up situation so that to avoid variance. JR, tight range player, pots it. So he pots it for $450. Now at this point, I'm not feeling very good. Recreational player calls a $450. Now they both have, JR had about 700 behind. Rec player has about 900 or 1,000 behind. I am up 1,200 at this point. In my mind, I was thinking, okay, if they're playing with 3-5 also, I'm redrawing to the diamond draw. Plus, I also have the straight on the other board. And JR is potting it on the flop. It feels like there's a good chance that if I'm losing if I'm chopping on one board, I could win the other board. And there's a lot of draws out there. So in my mind, I was thinking, do I want to take this high variance route? The fact that I'm up 1,200 in the session, I was like, hell yeah, let's do this. So I repot it. And when I repot it, JR, of course, he goes all in and rec player calls. And it's the most sick hand. So it's a $3,000 pot. If I get scooped at this point, I am still up $300 on the session. So I feel like this is a good gamble because there's a likely chance that I am ahead on the turn and I've got scooping potential. JR is my friend. Whenever we all show our hands on the turn, JR has top set of 9s on one board and he's got the nut spade draw on both boards. So I'm like throwing up in my stomach because now I have to dodge the board pairing and I have to dodge every spade in the deck. Then I look over a rec player. He has nut diamond draw on both boards. So I have to dodge the board pairing, any diamond, and any spade. I'm not the best at math. I'm pretty good at math, but that's so many cards in the deck that at this point, even though I am scooping on the turn, I'm winning on both boards at this point. I very, very easily could get scooped. Like, I even think I might be an underdog. I don't know. JR does, he boats up on the top board and he hits the nut flush, he scoops it. So he gets the $3,000 pot. It's a sick hand. I fortunately did scoop the side pot with rec player. He missed both diamond draw, but I had straights on both boards, so I was able to scoop that extra 200 on the side. So I'm still up 400 on this, 400 or 500 on the session, but I could have been up 3,000 or 4,000 on the session. It would have been, I would have been up about 2,500 or 3,000 on the session. So I think it was a good gamble, and the fact that it went to JR, my friend, I'm glad. He's a good friend of mine, so sick hand. Okay, this next hand is an interesting spot. Maniac player limps in. I'm on the button. Doug, great player, raises to $25. Maniac player calls. I have pocket fives, 5 of clubs, and 5 of diamonds. I decide to call, of course, to play in position. So it's ace, ace, 3, 2 diamonds. They both check it to me. Now, one thing I notice about Doug is he does like to check raise a lot. He would check an ace here. He would check pocket kings here. He would also check a lot of suited Broadway cards. So what he's good at is balancing his ranges, and he likes to trap a lot. He likes to check raise me a lot. So there's a good chance I have the best hand here. I could easily have the best hand here. So sometimes what people will do is they'll bet, but the problem is that Doug is a very capable player. If I bet here and he raises me, I really am not interested in playing this huge pot with a weak hand when I have a lot of showdown value. I decided to check it for several reasons. For pot control, plus I don't want to get check raised off my hand. I've got showdown value. So turn is an interesting card. It's the king of diamonds. They both check it to me. Now, I do think that Doug does have a lot of kings in his range, like king, queen. However, I don't think that he would check it twice if he had like ace, jack. I just feel like he wants to get value with a lot of aces in this spot. He would check a king here, but at this point in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if he has a king, I'm not going to fold his river bet. I also do have the 5 of diamonds, which I am redrawing to a 4-card flush. It's not that good of a flush, but it is something to keep in mind because he could have black cards. I decided to bet simply because what I'd like to do is I'd like to bet, and if I get called by Doug, the fact that I bet the turn, he's probably going to check river to me. I can check back for showdown value. So I'm really trying to get to a cheap showdown by betting on the turn. And of course, when I bet $30, Doug does check raise me. He check raises me to 125. Sick spot. Doug and I there's a lot of meta going on. I normally would just fold this to most players, but to Doug, he's going to be bluffing here a lot with queen jack offsuit with the queen of diamonds. He's drawing to Broadway. He's also drawing to the nut flush. He's also going to just check raise with air, in my opinion, because why would I, like, the fact that it checked through twice and then I bet on the button, it just looks really weak. It's a good start. It looks like a lot of dead money. The fact that that is potentially dead money shows that he might make a move there with just a draw. Like, he could just have jack 10 with a diamond. He could just have queen jack with a diamond. He could have queen jack, black cards. Like, there's a lot of hands that he could have that he might be bluffing here. So I decided to call the 125, hoping to get to showdown. The river is jack of spades. Doug bets out 125 or 150, and this just really sucks for me because all of his bluffs that I put him on just got there. His jack 10, his queen jack. He's capable of value betting me a lot with a king here because he knows that, like, I could call him light. And his small river bet is just screaming for value, plus, like, Doug's not a folder. There's no point in me raising here. It doesn't make sense. I'm not in the mood to really try to bluff someone that doesn't like to fold. So he's going to call me if I raise. I think his bluffs got there. If I stay true to the range that I put him on from the turn, I had to make a tight fold. He did turn the nut flush. He already had it. So I made a bad call on the turn. But it was a very interesting hand. I think the jack kind of killed his action. I think if it was a blank like a deuce, I would have called another couple $100 on the river. So interesting hand. Pretty standard hand. I have pocket aces. I raise in 3 callers. I raised it to $20, opened it for 20. 3 callers, maniac player. Now there are 10, 7, 3, all spades. I have the ace of spades in a multi-way pot with pocket aces. So I'm not going to slow play this because the players at this table are calling very light. I'm capable of bluffing a lot, so I decided to bet $40 into an 80. I bet half the pot. They all folded, unfortunately. I'm very surprised because, like people are calling with 8-9 with a spade. They're calling with Jack 10 offsuit with a pair of tens. So I'm very surprised I take that pot down. Kind of a disaster a little bit because I didn't get any value really for my aces, but at least it didn't get cracked. Okay, interesting hand. I am on the button. I have ace queen off. There's a couple limpers. Doug raises to $30. I do know Doug is raising with a tighter range. We get one caller, one folds. We get one caller, so now the pot is about $40, $38. I decided to 3-bet this to $125 to isolate with Doug with a strong hand in position. Doug, it has been opening his range at this point, and so I do feel like my ace queen is a very strong hand against his range, plays well. And I'm also happy to just take the blinds down, Ace queen offsuit is not the best hand multi-way, and I think it's a worthy hand to 3-bet, and Doug does fold, so we take it down. Anyways, overall, fun session, good times. I ended up buying in for $1,000, cashed out $1,910, so I ended up making $910 profit after time and food and tips. And so, great session, fun time. Hope to be able to get more content to you guys, more cash sessions, and get some of my ambassadors producing some of this content for you guys in the future. All right, peace out.